Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 17670 in the name of Alex Cole-Hamilton on addressing the inadequate provision of neurodevelopmental conditions. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons. I'd advise the Chamber that we are tight for time, and I call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to speak to and move the motion. Mr Cole-Hamilton, up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. It gives me great pleasure to propose the motion before the Parliament today, and I move it in my name. Presiding Officer, this is one of the kind of debates that I got into politics to lead, and that's a debate that comes straight from each of our constituency casework surgeries. I'm sure I am not alone. In the Mondays and the Fridays that we're not in this chamber, we receive our instructions from the people who sent us here, and we pick up themes and narratives around what's going on in the country. And since the pandemic, I've seen a worrying uptick, a worrying increase, almost an avalanche of cases coming to my surgery looking for my help for people who are struggling to obtain neurodivergence diagnostic support. And put simply, they can't get a diagnosis for things like ADHD or for autism. Families are coming to us, all of us, at breaking point. Parents worried sick about children who are struggling for want of a diagnosis, whether that's for autism or ADHD, struggling in class, struggling with their friendship groups and the isolation that comes with it, and who've been told, in some cases, in my constituency at least, that they can have to wait as long as 7 years for diagnostic assessment. Presiding Officer, 7 years. Put that in real terms, if you're 15 and you're struggling to concentrate at school, perhaps you're not even able to attend school, such as the severity of the situation around your neurodivergence. You may be facing life-qualifying exams, but 7 years takes you past your 22nd birthday, and that's just to get to the races before you're even prescribed anything that will control it. Your exams, your confidence, your future work prospects, your relationships, all affected by a fundamental lack of proper support. Presiding Officer, the pandemic didn't create neurodivergence, but it did strip away the routines and distractions that helped many people cope, and the scale of unmet need became impossible to ignore. Lockdown forced us to be still, and people who had usually filled their lives with noise and activity suddenly began to understand a great deal more about their makeup. And as we emerged from lockdown, referrals for ADHD diagnosis and for treatment soared, and waiting times exploded. And that didn't just happen here. It's a phenomenon we've seen the world over. In the year after COVID restrictions lifted, referrals for adult ADHD in Greater Glasgow and Clyde rose by more than 1,000%. That's a staggering number, but it speaks to that revelation, I think, that we encountered after the pandemic. And that, being replicated in countries around the world, led to a global shortage of ADHD medication due to the huge surge in demand. And as such, health boards, we had reports of closures of titration clinics, that people needed to get started on treatments in order to begin their care pathways. That created a perfect storm. So desperate for help, many families turned to the private sector. And for years, there was at least a safety net in that. If you could scrape together the money for a private diagnosis, your GP could prescribe you medication on the NHS under a system called Shared Care, where they would recognise that private diagnosis. But now, in areas like NHS Lothian, Shared Care has been inexplicably scrapped, and with no clear explanation as to why. Now, don't get me wrong, these families wouldn't normally have gone private. They couldn't afford to normally go private, but such was the desperation, such was their anxiety about the prospects for their children, they would scrape together that money and do so. And by so doing, they were doing everyone a favour. Because if you consider even a small proportion of the people on that list can get a quicker diagnosis privately, they're freeing up space for anybody else left in that list. So it should go without saying, though, Presiding Officer, no family should have to shell out thousands of pounds due to a failure in the system. That flies in the face against the fundamental principles under which the NHS was established. I've never had a satisfactory answer from NHS Lothian about why Shared Care has ended. I don't think we can blame GPs. It's not right to. They're stretched to breaking point. So let's be clear. This is a political failure. We've talked previously in this chamber about how GPs and primary cares have been let down by the Scottish Government, and the situation is no exception. In its amendment today, And by the decisions it is taking, the Scottish Government is failing to tackle or even acknowledge the serious pressure our GPs are under. I'm disappointed by this, but I'm not surprised. I also note from the Government's amendments this afternoon, it also sidesteps my party's call for a robust protocol for reinstating shared care arrangements. Again, disappointed but not surprised. We need to show real leadership here so that people get the support they need now, not in 7 years' time. I will from Sandesh Gilhani.
Sandesh Gilhani, briefly.
Just a declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. When patients come to see me, they are desperate often, and they do come with private diagnosis, and there is nothing that I can do for them. And I wonder if the member agrees that that is absolutely destroying the morale of the medical profession.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I think we all know and have had several debates in this chamber about the pressure our hard-working GPs are under. And I pay credit to Sandesh Gilhani for his work at the front line, and I think his testimony speaks volumes and adds itself to this debate. Ministers also won't acknowledge their failure to keep the pledge to allocate 10% of NHS spending to mental health. Hard won, but now disappeared. And 1% to CAMHS, a promise made and a promise broken. Presiding officer, this is a crisis. It's a crisis for learning, for mental health, for work, for families. It affects attainment in our schools, productivity in our economy, and the well-being of tens of thousands of our constituents. That's why Lib Dems have brought this debate today. We're demanding urgent action from the government. So today, we're calling for those robust protocols on shared care. We're calling to create a national stepped pathway for autism and ADHD diagnosis, to ensure titration clinics remain open, deliver the promised 10% of NHS budget to mental health, and recruit the GPs, psychiatrists and support workers we need. Presiding officer, this isn't just about cutting waiting times.
You need to conclude.
I will conclude. It's about building a system that meets the needs of people where they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. And I now call on Marie Todd to speak to and move Amendment 17670.3. Minister, up to 5 minutes, please.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. I'd like to also thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing forward this motion, highlighting the need to improve neurodevelopmental support. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the increase in people, both children and adults, seeking neurodevelopmental support and assessment across Scotland is creating challenges for services right across Scotland. Figures on the number of people seeking a diagnosis for a neurodevelopmental condition are not currently nationally reported or published. And we're working with health boards and local authorities to improve our understanding of how many people are seeking support and how this data can be used to deliver improvements. At this point, it is important that I acknowledge, though, that a diagnosis can be important to individuals' health and well-being, but I must stress that a diagnosis is not required to access support. I also want to address the issue raised in the motion of unmet need for mental health support. Certainly.
Let's call Hamilton briefly.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. Does she recognise that, whilst that's right, the diagnosis isn't necessary just for support, it is definitely necessary for medication. And in some cases, and particularly with ADHD, medication can really manage symptoms.
Minister.
So certainly, as a prescriber myself, I recognise the role of medication in the treatment of ADHD. It isn't the only treatment, and neither is it the first-line treatment. So there are a number of steps to go through before medication is prescribed for ADHD. I do recognise that medication can be life-changing for people with that diagnosis, though. I want to put on record, though, today that we have the highest numbers of staff delivering more care to a larger number of people than ever before. For the first time ever, national performance against the 18-week child and adolescent mental health services standard has been met, with 90.6% of children and young people starting treatment within 18 weeks of referral. The direct mental health programme budgets also more than doubled in the last 5 years. Collectively, with NHS boards, we spend over £1.5 billion in this area, and this year we expect over £1.5 billion will be spent this current year and health boards continue to make good progress towards their targets of 10% of their frontline spend being on mental health, including 1% on CAMHS. There's a range of work underway to improve support for neurodivergent adults. We've accepted the recommendations from the Adult Neurodevelopmental Pathways Pilot, and we're working with partners to implement these. We also fund the National Autism Implementation Team to support NHS boards to develop and to enhance and redesign local neurodevelopmental services for adults. And through our Adult Autism Support Fund, we invest £1 million a year to provide support to autistic adults. That fund supported 1,800 autistic people in 470 families. And formal diagnosis isn't required to access the support provided. Training and development for the workforce is also key to improving services and getting better at meeting demand. And that's why we've commissioned NHS Education for Scotland and NAIT to develop a range of professional learning on neurodevelopmental conditions. Presiding officer, as I spoke about in the Chamber recently, we're also taking action to support young people with neurodevelopmental needs. Building on previous investment of over £1 million, we've provided nearly £250,000 in 24-25 to fund a range of individual projects aimed at improving assessment and support for children and young people. In partnership with COSLA, we've been undertaking a review of the implementation of the National Neurodevelopmental Specification. It offers an opportunity to reflect on learning and progress, and it will inform improvements to support health boards and local authorities to deliver the specification, and I'll provide further update in the Chamber on that in due course. I know that many people are concerned about this issue of private diagnosis and shared care policies. Some NHS boards do have shared care policies, but it does always remain at the clinical discretion of each individual GP to decide the best course of action for their patients. My officials have written to all health boards seeking information on the adult neurodevelopmental services and support that are offered locally, including protocols for patients with a private diagnosis. I should highlight, though, that any local protocols can't require GPs to enter shared care agreements. GPs are independent contractors and they're not obliged to enter into agreements as a consequence of their contracts with local NHS boards. Finally and quickly, an issue I know is concerning to many people with ADHD and their families is the issue with medication shortages for ADHD. The Chief Pharmaceutical Officer wrote to boards in January to provide further background on medicine shortages more generally, how they're managed, and to clarify the current position on ADHD prescribing. I look forward to hearing from colleagues and responding to more specific issues in my closing statement. And I move the motion.
Thank you, Minister. I now call Sandy Gulhani to speak to and move Amendment 17670.2. Up to 4 minutes, Dr Gulhani.
Thank you, and we support this motion and will be voting for it overall. Deputy Presiding Officer, as a clinician, I've seen firsthand the growing numbers of family coming through my door worried sick about their children's development or mental health, and they're exhausted from hitting brick walls when they try to get help. They're not asking for miracles. They're asking for assessments that don't take years, for teachers who understand their child's needs, and for support that actually shows up when it's needed, not an age after the crisis has already hit. We are absolutely in a mental health emergency, and the lack of effective support for neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD and autism is making it worse. COVID accelerated demand, but let's be honest, these cracks were there before the pandemic. Children are now waiting up to 4 years for assessments. A 12-year-old will be assessed when he's sitting his NAT5s. And we also know that in some health board services have simply shut their doors to new referrals. I don't need to tell anyone here what that does to families. Parents are left feeling ignored. Young people lose confidence. They fall behind in school, and in too many cases develop more serious mental health issues as a result. The SNP say they're investing in mental health, but we've got a postcode lottery. And behind every postcode is a child, a parent, a family, a teacher, a GP, trying to hold things together without the right tools. The number of special teachers has gone down. Special schools have been shut. In fact, in my own region of Glasgow, East Park has delivered outstanding specialist education for the most challenging children with special needs on the same Glasgow site for over 150 years. But their £1.3 million grant is ending, throwing them into a crisis. As for mainstream schools, they are expected to do more with less, while more than 40% of pupils now have additional support needs. The SNP also quietly shelved their proposed learning disability, autism and neurodiversity bill. We in the Scottish Conservatives believe this all has to change, and it has to change urgently. We want to see clear national pathways for assessment and treatment, proper investment in CAMHS and local neurodevelopmental teams, shared care arrangements reinstated where appropriate so people diagnosed privately aren't abandoned by the NHS. And we want schools equipped to support neurodivergent pupils from the start, not after problems escalate. We need to stop managing crisis and start delivering early, joined-up care that gives children the best chance to thrive and parents the reassurance that the system is on their side and not working against them. Thank you, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Dr Gulhani. I now call on Paul Sweeney to speak to and move Amendment 17670.1 up to 4 minutes. Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I would like to thank the member for Edinburgh Western for allocating one of his party's first official Opposition Day debates to a motion about the inadequate provision for neurodevelopmental conditions in Scotland, as I know that our constituents' access to mental health services is an area that is close to the heart of many members across the chamber, reflected in our casework. It is a matter of fact that this government has overseen a decline in mental health service quality across the country, and from the amendment they have tabled today, it seems that they are unwilling to address and remedy it. We are rightly concerned about the state of mental health services in Scotland. Even though the COVID pandemic devastated Scotland's already overstretched mental health services, we find ourselves in a position where funding is still not being allocated properly to realise best value, where waiting lists keep growing, where private diagnoses are increasing unnecessarily, and where service after service is cut across Scotland, with the buck passed to local authorities and ministers washing their hands. We need to recognise that we did not build back better. Indeed, it has just been crisis followed by crisis, leading to more broken lives and distressed families across Scotland. And I think this is a point where we so often forget when we talk about funding and percentages. We forget what the Scottish Government's goal of the NHS spending 10% of its funding on mental health services and 1% of its funding on CAMHS is supposed to mean. This isn't just meant to be an abstract numerical target. It's supposed to mean security of funding for mental health practitioners, the end of waiting times measured in months and years rather than weeks, and a Scotland where support is available for those who need it and not just those who can afford private healthcare, a Scotland where children's mental health is a priority and not an afterthought, and getting it right for every child is the reality. Because let us remember, there are real people affected by the government's failure. We know that people with ADHD are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide, where self-harm is higher in those with ADHD and emotional dysregulation. Every delay in diagnosis, every failure to intervene early is a decision that may lead to far worse outcomes for the individual involved. There is a price to be paid for this government's failure, and it is a price that falls on the heads of those most unable to pay it. That is why the Labour Party is happy to support this motion today, and our amendment strengthens the motion by calling on the government to publish data on the number of patients with neurodevelopmental conditions who are being removed from CAMHS waiting lists. We know there is a real danger that children and adolescents are falling through the gaps, and that the current data collection is not able to accurately capture this situation. We therefore need to see a step change in how the Scottish Government collects its data so that the statistics reflect the experience on the ground and not just a contrived mathematical construct that allows ministers to say job well done and ignore the unacceptable reality faced by our constituents and reflected in our casework. We know that this government is failing adolescents and children across Scotland. We see that in our inboxes. In Glasgow, we have seen waiting times increase, vital services like the Notre Dame Children's Centre shut, and more responsibilities placed on the shoulders of teachers and school counsellors to fill the gaps left by funding shortfalls and a more general deprioritisation of mental health, as we've seen through the cuts through the integrated joint boards and health and social care partnerships. This is simply not good enough, and it's not good enough for ministers to shirk responsibility for the consequences of these funding cuts at a local authority level. It is right that this Parliament recognises the mental health crisis presided over by the Government and calls for urgent action by that Government to take place quickly. We are happy to support this motion, and I hope that all members will join Labour in supporting our amendment to call for better data collection for those who are removed from CAMHS waiting lists. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much, Mr Sweeney. And I now call on Ariane Burgess. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too would like to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing forward this important debate and to express my gratitude to staff across the health and education and third sector who work with dedication to support people with neurodevelopmental conditions. There's little doubt that across Scotland there is a fundamental gap in how we identify, assess and support those with neurodevelopmental conditions, particularly autism and ADHD, and this is causing real harm. Constituents have contacted me and my colleagues seeking support and direction, and we've heard that also from Alex Cole-Hamilton as well. There's a lot to cover in this debate, and while I'll try not to repeat what others have already said, I do wish to highlight a few key points that are essential. Demand for assessments is rising and the existing systems are unable to cope. And the result is years-long waits for diagnosis. Without one, many can't access the basic support they need to participate fully and confidently in education, work and community life. Long waits and unclear pathways are standing in the way of effective treatment. And this is particularly true for ADHD. For example, where treatment can be highly effective and truly transformative. I hope this debate can serve as the starting point for a constructive conversation about what needs to change. We need clear action and strong commitments from the Scottish Government to begin fixing a system that's currently failing too many people. And I welcome the call for the Government to convene a cross-party summit that would focus on reducing waits for the neurodevelopmental support and increasing mental health capacity. This is an important first step in initiating the conversation, and I hope the Minister will commit to ensuring that people with lived experience are not only heard, but play a central role in shaping solutions and decisions going forward. Another critical issue is the lack of accurate data. We don't know how many people are waiting for assessment or how long they have to wait. Without this transformation, we cannot accurately measure progress. Significant action can and should be taken to address these issues. The Royal College of Psychiatrists in Scotland calls for strong national leadership and a clear focus on delivering support across 4 key levels of care. They've devised a model with practical solutions to many of the immediate and medium-term challenges, and they're clear that this must be paired with a long-term strategy. We need to move away from a single condition model. Many people experience multiple overlapping challenges. For example, a person with autism may not just have autism, but several other conditions. We need integrated neurodevelopmental pathways in all 14 health board areas, replacing siloed systems with coordinated whole-person approaches. The National Autism Implementation Team NAIT report on adult neurodevelopmental pathways makes this clear. It calls for consistent national standards, early access to support and proper accountability. We need to stop treating neurodevelopmental support as an optional extra. National leadership is essential, as is long-term investment. Third sector organisations have long echoed this. There is promising work underway. The proposals for new care models and the inclusion of neurodevelopmental conditions in the mental health and wellbeing strategy are all steps forward. The NAIT report gives us a direction, but efforts should be stepped up. The pace so far has been too slow. Community-based models show promise, but at present many still access the GPs or secondary care referrals. Monitoring and ongoing support in the community is patchy and inconsistency. To wrap up, this is the moment to be ambitious. We need to see the Scottish Government expand and create adult neurodevelopmental pathways and stepped care models. These have been recommended by the NIT and the College of Psychiatrists in the 2021 National Clinical ADHD Pathway Feasibility Study. This has to be backed by leadership, funding and accountability. We must start the conversation to build a system that works for everyone and back it up with urgent action.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Willie Rennie to be followed by Eleanor Whittam. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It was once the case that middle-aged men, working men, were placed on incapacity benefits. They were from post-industrial communities. They were stuck on those incapacity benefits for years. It had a detrimental effect on their lives. It had a detrimental effect on the economy and on the tax base of the country. Now it has changed. We are now facing a situation where it's younger people with mental health conditions, neurodevelopmental conditions, ADHD, autism, and they are stuck on those benefits and that support at a very young age. So we are losing them, not just the middle age through to their retirement, but from their young lives. And that's bad for them because they're stuck on those benefits for their whole life. It's not good for their health, it's not good for the economy, and it's not good for the tax base of the country. And we see that in the figures now, because the 16 to 64-year-old inactivity rates in Scotland are at 24%. In England, it's 21.7%, which is bad enough, but it's 24% in Scotland. And together with our demographic challenge of our ageing population, who aren't ageing well, they're ageing with long-term conditions, which places a significant pressure on public services, but also on the economic inactivity for those who are retiring early. And that pincer movement is having a dramatic impact on our economy and on our tax base. In other words, it's just not sustainable. And that's let alone the impact on those individuals who are struggling with these conditions for years upon end. Now, I attended the St Andrews ADHD support group earlier on this year. Bright, intelligent people, full of ideas, really engaged people. But they were struggling to get the support that they needed. And they told me about their one parent told me about their son, who, when they were at school, they were diagnosed with ADHD and got the right support. They were stabilised. When they left school, they came off the medication. They went off the rails. They got into trouble, difficulties with the police, with the justice system. They tried to get back on. 3 years later, they're still waiting. And all that time, he's unable to work. He's unable to contribute. A bright young lad who could make a huge contribution to the country, but also would take the burden of the state as well. That is a crying shame that he is not just one, but one of many. And that is why we need to provide these solutions. Now, I think the Royal College of Psychiatrists' stepped care approach with the 4-tier national programme that's been talked about today is the right step. Of course, it's the right step. It doesn't have to just be a medicalised route. Some people perhaps can get benefit from alternative methods of support. But waiting for years for even that is unacceptable. And that's why this pathway needs to be implemented with urgency. And Children First, they talk about for young people, the medicalised route is not necessarily the appropriate way either, that whole family support is an alternative that can work. But we need to get this coordinated fast, because this is a crisis that's bedevilled the country. But I want to provide one further challenge, and that is to the NHS as a whole. And that if we are to deal with this economic inactivity levels, we're going to have to place the right priority and the right funds in the right places. Because if we don't tackle the economic inactivity, we won't have the tax that's necessary to pay for our NHS services. So that's my appeal to the Health Secretary. is that he looks at the overall allocation of resources and recognises this huge challenge.
Thank you. I now call Eleanor Whittam to be followed by Annie Wales. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Whittam.
It's clear that we are facing significant challenges in how we support individuals with neurodevelopmental conditions in Scotland, challenges that demand not only honest recognition but bold and compassionate action. We're all acutely aware of the profound pressures on our mental health services, and these pressures were hugely intensified by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many individuals, like my own loved one, became unable to mask their neurodiversities when the world went back to normal and their whole life was impacted. And believe me, total burnout and withdrawal from life for over a year is horrendous. Demand has risen sharply, not just for CAMHS, but for adult services as well. More people are seeking answers, assessments and support for neurodevelopmental conditions like autism and ADHD, and they're not wrong to expect timely, effective care. We as the Parliament cannot shy away from the fact that there are far too many being left to wait, too many families who are struggling just trying to keep their heads above water, and too many GPs in educational settings are bearing an unsustainable burden. Presiding Officer, I fully recognise the distress caused by the current situation. I've heard from many constituents about this subject, from parents battling for a diagnosis, from adults coming to terms with a new understanding of themselves but facing years-long waits for assessment and treatment, or indeed no way to get onto said waiting list as they are closed unless they've got a demonstrable, co-occurring severe and enduring mental health condition. Indeed, one of my own constituents has a petition lodged with this Parliament entitled Improve Access to ADHD Diagnosis and Treatment Across Scotland. Presiding Officer, our constituents should not have to raise petitions to get access to healthcare. Despite my own child's 4-year wait for assessment, I consider my family lucky. Unlike the family who came to see me only last Friday in my office, who have a child experiencing acute mental distress, but have no way to seek assessment as their GP's multiple referrals are being knocked back, despite being told that their child is most likely autistic. They're pushed between services, the school's trying really hard to support decreasing attendance. A GP is recognising the mental distress being experienced, but a system that rejects all of the evidence, saying it's all down to their suspected but as yet undiagnosed neurodivergence. That's not acceptable. We cannot have a system that sees people's mental health spiral due to unmet neurodevelopmental needs, nor a system that requires such deterioration to access the pathway. I know that the Scottish Government have committed to delivering the neurodevelopmental specification, and we are all avidly watching to see this manifest. It's vitally important as it aims to ensure children and young people can access timely, coordinated support regardless of whether they have a formal diagnosis. And I know that's supposed to be what's happening just now. And that is a fundamental shift from waiting to identify to responding to need early and holistically. But we also need to ensure that local areas are resourced, supported and trained to undertake this work. This was what was supposed to happen for my own family, but there was actually no support on the ground. It's one thing to say that no diagnosis is needed, and another thing to have services actually responding to the real and urgent need, which all of our inboxes is there telling us that is required. Presiding Officer, we cannot overlook the reality of workforce pressures, the structural complexity of services, or the trauma that delays can cause. We also cannot pretend that private diagnosis is a viable option for families. And where it is used, we need to be transparent. We need a transparent, clinically safe, shared care framework that allows for collaboration with NHS professionals, not the blanket refusals that we're all hearing about. So let me close with this. We cannot shy away from the scale of the challenge. I acknowledge that progress has been made in the background, but it's yet to be felt on the ground by my constituents. Let's work together across the Chamber with a cross-party summit being convened to ensure that every Scot, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, child or adult, gets the support that they need to thrive.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. I now call Annie Wells to be followed by Claire Baker. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be able to take part in this important debate today, and I thank Alex Cole-Hamilton and the Liberal Democrats for bringing forward it to the Chamber. But this is not the first time we've debated the mental health emergency in Scotland, and I, for one, don't believe it will be the last. But it's hard to think of a topic which has been discussed so widely in Holyrood, and yet in which we see little progress has been made. Indeed, on many fronts, Scotland's mental health crisis only appears to be getting worse. It's getting worse for the kids in school, it's getting worse for their teachers and parents, and it's getting worse for adults battling a range of problems for which treatment seems virtually impossible to access. And most political parties have agreed at one point or another that mental health should have the same parity of esteem with physical health within government and within the NHS. But no one working in this system or who has had to navigate their way through it from outside really believes this has ever happened. Today's debate focused on a number of areas relating to neurodevelopmental conditions and the provision, or lack of, to help people cope with them. These shortages affect people of all ages, but its impact upon children, which is causing the most distress across society. Services are so chaotic and disjoined, and the waiting time so unbearably long that many young people won't even be children anymore by the time the NHS gets round to seeing them. And this, Presiding Officer, is not a reflection on the dedicated and hard-working staff, many of whom constantly go the extra mile just to keep their services above water. But it is very much a reflection on the Scottish Government, which has underfunded and undervalued mental health care for over nearly 20 years in power. Since 2007, mental health has been under the sole control of the SNP government. It is entirely devolved, and the Scottish Government has no one to blame, only itself, about the current state of affairs. Education has also devolved, and the Scottish Government's desire to mainstream as many children as possible is visibly backfiring. We've had countless reports shared in this chamber and beyond of how so many young people are being forced into environments to which they clearly are unsuited. It ruins their learning and development and jeopardises the experience and education to those around them too. And only last year, Presiding Officer, I had a Glasgow family in my office in tears because they could not access special school provision for their child who has severe autism. They were terrified about what life would look like for him in a mainstream school. But because of the government policy and local government policy, they had no choice but to go with it. And the statistics bear this out too. Hundreds of special schools have been lost since 2007 across the country, and with them have gone hundreds more specialist experienced and skilled teachers. Kids are waiting years for testing in relation to autism and ADHD, and professional psychiatry bodies have said by failing to help these young people now, we are merely storing up even more problems for the future. Presiding Officer, there are things this government could do now to help. They could increase mental health spending to the 10% of the frontline NHS budget. They could ensure there is sufficient capacity in education for pupils with complex needs. And they could better support teachers in helping them identify and help pupils with conditions like ADHD and autism. These measures would make a real difference for those suffering on the ground. And if mental health and physical health are indeed to have parity of esteem, these commitments would be a good place to start. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Willis. I now call Claire Baker to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The motion for today's debate sets out clearly the lack of provision for neurodevelopmental conditions and the impacts this is having. The significant waiting times for diagnosis and support are leaving far too many without the support that they need. The 2021 report by the National Autism Implementation Team was clear on the need for neurodevelopmental pathways and stepped care, but the lack of delivery alongside the growing demand is putting huge pressures on our mental health services. In my own region, NHS Fife has publicly recognised the impact that demand for neurodevelopmental services is having on mental health teams. And it was one of the Pathfinder sites identified for adult neurodevelopmental pathways following the 2021 feasibility study. An audit undertaken in 2023-24 showed there was significant unmet need and high demand for adult neurodevelopmental services. Like all boards, they are in dire need of additional resources and solutions from the Scottish Government, but within existing resources, they are starting to pilot some approaches. A digital neurodevelopmental hub has been created alongside self-help platforms such as moodcafe.co.uk, which is designed to give families and individuals better access to guidance, screening tools and signposting to support. NHS Fife is also trialling group-based interventions such as ICANN, delivered by psychology teams, and Sparks, which is developed by occupational therapists. And these are aimed at helping people build resilience and coping strategies while waiting for formal assessment or treatment. These are pragmatic, forward-thinking initiatives. but they are not a replacement for properly resourced and delivered care models and pathways. We know that where statutory services have struggled to meet demand, the voluntary and community sector steps up. In Mid Scotland and Fife, we have some great organisations working hard to provide support. In Glenrothes, Autism Rocks Fife has been a lifeline for many families. Run by parents for parents, it offers advice, peer support, playgroups and events for children and young people. For many local families, it is the first port of call when diagnosis is delayed or support is absent. In Lochgelly, Hyper Club provides a safe, inclusive place for children and young people with additional needs, many of whom are neurodivergent. These clubs don't just offer respite to parents, they offer a sense of belonging and understanding that formal systems often fail to provide. While the support these groups are able to offer is invaluable, they should be delivered alongside NHS services. The Scottish Government must act with urgency required to ensure that support is available without extensive waits and in all communities. The Scottish Government promised to allocate 10% of NHS spending to mental health and 1% to CAMHS, but they have not yet met either target. They promised to recruit additional roles to support community health resilience. They promised a learning disability, autism and neurodiversity bill to give voice and rights to people who are too often overlooked. They promised action on CAMHS waiting times. Instead, they have been quietly removing patients with neurodevelopmental diagnosis from those waiting lists altogether, skewing the data to mask the truth. Transparency around these figures is essential if we are to ensure that we can make progress. The economic impact of undiagnosed neurodevelopmental conditions often makes a compelling argument. The Mental Health Foundation has estimated the lifetime cost of untreated ADHD at over £100,000 per person. The wider cost to the economy runs into the billions when we factor in lost productivity, increased health service use and social impacts. But at the core of this debate is the human impact. We know that people with neurodevelopmental conditions without the proper support in place can experience significant mental and physical health inequalities. They are more likely to experience depression and anxiety. They are more likely to struggle with employment, more likely to come into contact with the justice system or have substance misuse issues. But the right diagnosis and the right support can transform lives. That support can unlock talent and let people thrive, not just manage their symptoms, and that's what we all have to deliver.
Thank you, Ms Baker. We now come to the final speaker in the open debate, Christine Graham, up to 4 minutes. Ms Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I too welcome this debate and recognise the commitment of the Liberal Democrats to this subject. Because the diagnosis, indeed referral for individuals, adults or children suspected, for example, of having, say, ADHD, has become more of an issue post-COVID. There are a number of cases in my inbox on what has arisen as the differing protocols in different NHS board areas. However, in this short debate, I intend to focus on early intervention, preschool and early years. The preceding debate focused on education, as mine will, but I hope keep within the scope of the motion and the amendments, because I do not think coping with and supporting those with neurodiverse issues, and indeed their families, is isolated to health. Brief comments on the Government's amendment. We surely all agree there's unmet need, there's a sharp rise in demand following COVID, there is difficulty in the supply of medication, and there is concern of widespread removal of quote, shared care arrangements, close quotes, though I have worries that some parents can afford this and others can't. As indicated, I have cases of parents being told they cannot even... if I could... A little bit of time back, please.
Very, very briefly, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Very briefly, I understand what she's saying about people going private, but does she recognise that if even a small proportion of those went private for a diagnosis, they would relieve pressure on an already stretched waiting list?
Christine Graham.
I think the member, however, would accept that I always find it unfortunate that money can put you nearer the front of the queue. And I don't say this to in any way insult the people who do that. It's just a problem for me. That said, and this is not an alternative, ADHD or other neurodiverse conditions can be suspected, even identified without a diagnosis, and the support for a toddler or a child may not require medication. And that's not to dismiss medication, it's not to dismiss diagnosis, because it does matter. But there may be, if appropriate, options, temporary or permanent. For example, early intervention at school or nursery may be preferable as a first step. It will also support other children when one child disrupts that nursery or class, to the extent that all the other children are decanted into the playground almost daily. I say this in the context of some recent constituency cases and had a fruitful and focused conversation with the Borders Director of Education, Principal Education Psychologist and Chief Education Officer. The upshot is that in 3 primary schools, tailored support has been provided to each individual child for what the education team describe as a 12-week process. It appears to be working in the interest of the class and the individual child. The situation where classes had been disrupted appears to be improving. I cannot say whether medication is involved for those individual children, but certainly those interventions with support are working. Diagnosis matters, medication matters, but there are other steps that be taken in place of or additional to that diagnosis and medication. But let me stress this and conclude, saying this submission about other interventions is not to sidestep, to dismiss or minimise that diagnosis and medication, but simply to illustrate these may be, and I stress may be, not necessary in whole or in part. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. We now move to the wind-up speeches. I call first Ariane Burgess. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This debate has certainly brought to light our urgent need to strengthen the way we support people with neurodevelopmental conditions across Scotland, and I'd like to thank colleagues for their thoughtful contributions. It's good to see widespread recognition of both the scale and the challenge and the opportunity we have to improve provision. Willie Rennie pointed out that medicalised route is not necessarily needed for everyone or the best in some cases. And we just heard from Christine Graham talking about the need for early intervention at school or nursery, where if we provide appropriate tailored support, again, we may not need medical interventions. Eleanor Whittam raised the challenge of constituents, and we heard that again from others across the chamber, of a family being pushed around in the system, even though they had had an indication from a GP of a potential diagnosis, but couldn't get it. And also the need to make sure that local areas are properly resourced. And again, Willie Rennie and Annie Wells spoke about the fact that young people who are really having to wait so long that they won't be children anymore. And Claire Baker spoke about the third sector community groups in her constituency that offer incredible support to families, but that this actual support should be being delivered with support from the NHS. So there are some key actions. There's no doubt that the current system is under serious strain. Families and individuals are waiting far too long for assessment, treatment and support. The motion rightly calls on the Scottish Government to work urgently with NHS boards and local authorities to improve shared care arrangements. And the recommendations from the NAIT and the Royal College of Psychiatrists are clear. We need dedicated adult neurodevelopmental pathways and stepped care models. The ongoing scoping work on demand and capacity and the use of local neurodevelopmental data are essential, but data collection must not delay decisive action. We can't afford to wait while individuals and families remain in limbo. Finally, I wish to express sincere thanks to the NHS staff, local authority teams and third sector organisations who continue to provide vital neurodevelopmental and mental health services. They often fulfil their roles under immense pressure, and I hope that this debate can be the beginning of a focused and sustained effort to listen to those with lived experience, learn from evidence and urgently deliver the real change that's needed.
Thank you. I call on Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I really want to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I agree with Ariane Burgess. I think it's been a good look at this important matter. I thought it was very good to hear the Minister acknowledge that things need to improve, and that is very helpful. And I thought Eleanor Whittam's call for a sort of cross-party focus is really very helpful as well. But reflecting on what we have heard today, it is clear that the current provision for neurodevelopment conditions does not match rising needs and demand. Those within the system and their family feel and they are being let down. I think my colleague Paul Sweeney laid that out quite well in his speech, but I thought the contribution from Willie Rennie really brought some very strong points that we perhaps don't always consider. We heard from Dr Gohani and others. Many are waiting months, sometimes years for treatment, and we have yet to see a dedicated pathway for diagnosis. So the government did promise to improve access to reduce waiting times for CAM services. Some children and young people are still waiting years for treatment, is what we're hearing in our inboxes. But we know that delays sort of threaten the effectiveness of the treatments, and I think Ariane Burgess, I think it was mentioned this, and others, that we do need to help people with that change in their life. Mental health services are facing unprecedented pressure. We know that, and all of the members spoke about that. We do accept that. But the NHS spending on mental health services falls short of the government's 10% commitment, and a number of members did mention that. Perhaps the Minister can speak about that in her closing speech. This failure falls against a backdrop of increased reporting of mental health conditions, and I think that links very well to the Labour's amendment, in that we really need to understand the figures, we really need to understand what is happening, and I hope the government does recognise that as well. The removal of patients from CAM's waiting lists means that already waiting years, they now have to wait even longer, and that has been brought up to me on many occasions. Families, I think, and parents, people waiting, they don't understand what has happened, and I think we do have a responsibility in the Chamber, across the Chamber, the Government of course, but all of us, to really understand the pattern of what is happening long terms. And I think that is why Scottish Labour really today in their amendment is seeking to strengthen whatever we agree today, to say that the government should get that data into the public so that we can understand the number of patients with neurodevelopmental conditions and how that is relating to the CAMS waiting list. I think Alex Cole-Hamilton in the opening speech raised the shared care failure and the work that's needed with GPs very well, and I think we will all agree that patients who really, and their families who really cannot afford to go private, are doing that because they feel it's so important for their loved ones. And then there is another hurdle facing that, so we really need to get on top of that. I think workforce planning, we all agree, is absolutely crucial. We need to see what we need in these work streams. I think, again, I want to raise something my colleague Claire Baker mentioned. This has been mentioned to me, the disappointment around the Learning Disability, Autism and Neurodivergence Bill, and something needs to come forward for parents and families who are quite heartbroken about this promise. I think, in fairness, for too long the SNP has been asleep at the wheel on this mental health crisis. We need investment in mental health services, more mental health workers and improvements to CAM services. Patients, parents and clinicians deserve better than what is currently happening from the government or what they're currently delivering. And this is why Scottish Labour really support the motion debated today and hope that our amendment has strengthened that. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on Stephen Kerr.
Well, it's nice to see you back in the chair, Presiding Officer. Well, we've had a good debate, and the frustrating thing about this debate is we actually all seem to be agreeing with one another. And I know that can happen in a Scottish Parliament debate, but everyone's expressing frustration about what is not happening and what should happen. And so I want to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing forward this debate and the previous debate, and just say I think it's a terrible shame that the government can't use the hours of their debating time for these subjects to be properly addressed in a full-scale debate. And I think they run away from these issues. And I've got to say from the off that while Alex Cole-Hamilton gave a brilliant summary of what the problems are, I felt Marie Todd, the Minister's contribution, was too self-congratulatory. There was not enough self-awareness or realisation that they are the government and have been sitting where they sit for 18 years, and we are still talking about a problem that is worsening and not improving. When Sandesh Gulhani talked about there being a postcode lottery, he combined that stated fact with anecdotal evidence of his own experience as a GP in dealing with some of the emotional issues that arise in his surgery as families express their frustration for the lack of care they are giving. And I come back to this point that Paul Sweeney made so well in a simple phrase. Ministers, he said, are washing their hands of the issue. And all too often in this chamber, Scottish ministers are repeating the same action of washing their hands of an issue for which they have full accountability to this House, to this chamber, but also to the people of Scotland. And Willie Rennie gave an excellent speech talking about the cost, the human cost of the lack of action we see in this area, and specifically highlighting the economic cost. The statistic he shared about economic inactivity among 16 to 64-year-olds ought to make us all stop and think very deeply about what our priorities are in this Parliament and what the Scottish Government's priorities ought to be to get this country working. And when he told the story about his visit to the ADH support group in St Andrews, he used the term in relation to the young man whose story he shared of it being a crying shame. I would go stronger. I think it's a scandal. It's a scandal that we live in one of the richest countries in the world, and we can't give this sort of support to people who need help. That is beyond a crying shame. I think it is a scandal. And I think that it's very hard to disagree with Elena Whittam. She said, and I hope I'm not misquoting her, and I'm sure she'll correct me if I am, that we cannot shy away from the fact that too many people are being let down. People, she said, should not have to raise petitions to get the health care they need. I think that says it all. And if this debate has done anything, it should serve to call us to action, not just to share words and sentiments and sympathies, but to actually see something is done to change this situation. And Annie Wells talked about... I absolutely will.
Christine Graham.
Thank you. It's very kind of you. Do you in any way accept anything in my submission which was not to park medication or assessments, but to look at interventions, alternatives early on through the educational process at the very start at nursery?
Always through the chair.
Of course I agree with Christine Graham on that subject. Of course I do. All practical means should be used to alleviate the suffering and confusion that people feel when they have these conditions, that they don't know what they are. Their own self-awareness is challenged. And it's right what Christine Graham said. But she also said in concluding her remarks, I think, that this was not an attempt on her part to sidestep the importance of diagnosis. And it's on diagnosis, if I might conclude, because there are many other things. And by the way, Claire Baker was absolutely right, presiding officer. The playing about with the waiting lists, the changing of definitions, the moving of blocks of people to different lists, it's a disgrace. And this government has engaged in that and has done for years in order to get the answer that they want from statistics. That's not acceptable. And so I conclude on diagnosis to simply say this, that the Minister failed to acknowledge that for adults in particular, the inability to obtain a diagnosis disqualified them from some of the support they need, particularly, as Willie Rennie said, in relation to employment. It is not a luxury to get a diagnosis. It's not an added extra. It is the key that often unlocks the support that people need, particularly when it comes to their employment, a point, as I say, that Willie Rennie made. And I realise I'm out of time, but I want to thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing this subject to the floor of the Chamber. I hope the Minister, I hope the Cabinet Secretary will meet with the Parliamentary Minister and ask for a proper debate in proper debating time so we can properly air this issue and come together as a Parliament to see that something changes for people who ought not have any further delay in their diagnosis and treatment.
Thank you. And I call on Marie Todd, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to again thank the Liberal Democrats for bringing this issue to the Chamber and to thank all members for their contributions. I want to reiterate the importance of the Scottish Government that the Scottish Government places on providing high-quality services and support for neurodivergent people and for mental health, and my unwavering commitment to improvement. I acknowledge that the significant growth in demand for neurodevelopmental services, I acknowledge that growth. I've already set out that we've taken a number of steps to address this, and we are committed to continuing to take action, including including implementing the recommendations from the Adult Neurodevelopmental Pathways pilots, Children and Young People's Neurodevelopmental Specification Review, commissioning NES and NATE to provide professional learning about neurodevelopmental conditions, investing £1 million a year to provide support to autistic adults, and continuing to engage with the Royal College of GPs on shared care agreements. Yes, and I'll just finish this point. So we're engaging already with the Royal College of GPs on the shared care arrangements, and we're keen to unlock the barriers to entering those. I'll give way to Ariane Burgess.
Ariane Burgess.
Thank you. I would love to hear from the Minister if her government remains committed to the allocation of 10% of the NHS spending to mental health services and 1% specifically for CAMHS by the end of this parliamentary term. And also, it would be good to, because of the constructive nature of today, it would be good to get a bit of a sense of a timeline around the cross-party summit that's mentioned in the motion, the amendment.
Minister.
Absolutely. We are still committed to those 10% and 1% targets. Annie Wells was completely correct in the points that she made, that they are intended to achieve parity of esteem between physical health and mental health. And we are making good progress. The latest available figures are from 23-24, and they show that we're at 9.03% and 0.82% respectively. I do acknowledge there's a great deal more work to be done to ensure that neurodivergent people are able to access the support they need. We're all working hard to adapt to meet a new set of challenges at speed. If you give me one moment, I haven't finished responding to Ms Burgess. The Scottish Government can't deliver that change alone, and this isn't just the responsibility of government. It does require collaboration and a range of partners working together. And to that end, I'm absolutely content to commit to convening a cross-party summit on neurodevelopmental support needs. The summit will enable us to dedicate more time on this important topic. I think that probably responds to Mr Kerr's point as well. It also enables us to work together on a shared vision on the way forward. The change that we want to see won't happen overnight, but I hope members can acknowledge that there has been some progress made, there is work underway, and note this government's commitment to delivering further improvements going forward. On the issue of removal of children and young people from waiting lists, those people who are seeking an ND diagnosis, removing them from CAMHS waiting lists, I want to be absolutely categorical with Parliament that this isn't the case. As I've said many times in this chamber, the overriding focus is to ensure that the right help and support is available for our young people, and for many that's best provided through an ND pathway, not through CAMHS. I'm more than happy to support, though, the Labour Party amendment to improve data collection and publication in this area. Ariane Burgess also mentioned including lived experience, and I'm absolutely keen to do that. Willie Rennie, I agree on the opportunity cost that can come if people don't get the right support at the in the right place and at the right time. That's why we're working so hard to improve this situation. Elena Whittam spoke powerfully again and again. I'm in awe of her ability to talk about her own personal experience and use that to strengthen her work as a constituency MSP in this chamber. I agree that there is a real and urgent need all over this country to improve things where services aren't integrated, and I recognise that many people can't yet feel the difference on the ground. I do know, though, as well, and it's of no comfort to those who are waiting, that there are some pockets where things are working well. And Claire Burgess mentioned some of the initiatives in Fife. I visited North Lanarkshire recently and heard a powerful testimony from a mum who said very clearly, my child doesn't have a diagnosis yet, but I'm getting all the support that we need. Let me assure Claire Baker we are working on the LDAN bill, and we'll bring forward draft provisions shortly. Presiding Officer, I'm very, very grateful that we've had time today in the Chamber to debate this issue. I'm grateful for the commitment that colleagues have shown, and I look forward to working together to make much needed progress.
Thank you. And I call on Jamie Green to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Welcome back to your place. I think, first, let me thank all members who have contributed to this debate. I hope it has been quite a sobering experience for the SNP front benches today, because what has come across from it are a number of truths that I think all the opposition parties at the very least agree with, including some members of the governing party. There is some agreement on the following. There are extremely and overly long waits for diagnosis. There are gaps in adult services. That the retreat from shared care agreements, which people previously benefited from, do no longer exist. That has left families stranded and, in some cases, out of pocket, and that is not acceptable. That the human and economic cost of these incredibly long diagnosis waits and backlogs is unacceptable, and that the reality facing neurodivergent people in Scotland is not just a challenge, it is unjust, and as one member put it, it is scandalous. And I hope that is something that we, at least as a starting point, agree on. Because right now, thousands of children right across Scotland are simply waiting for an assessment. They're waiting for that initial autism or ADHD assessment. Let's look at some of the numbers on this. In NHS Lothian, that number currently sits at over 6,000 young people. In Glasgow, it's over 7,500 young people. In NHS Lanarkshire, that number is over 8,500 people. That's 22,000 young people in just those three areas alone, right now sitting on a waiting list. Not a waiting list for weeks, not a waiting list of months, but years, 2 years, 3 years, in some cases 7 years. How is that acceptable in modern-day Scotland? Of course, who picks up the pieces? GPs do. They're managing complex cases without the time or support that they need to come up with solutions. Teachers are picking up the pieces in our classrooms without adequate time or training or support. And families themselves are picking up the pieces because they're the ones that are trying to navigate a fragmented, broken system which too often confuses, delays or even denies them help. And of course, this is not a temporary backlog. If I make some progress first, and I will. This is not a temporary backlog. This doesn't happen overnight. This is a long-term failure of planning to meet growing demand. It's a demand that's been growing for almost a decade now. In the years 2019 to 2021, there was a 500%, 600%, 700% increase in demand for ADHD assessments. That was 6 years ago. The government has known that demand would increase, but capacity has not kept up. Now, the SNP made some very explicit and specific prompts. Now, the Cabinet Secretary for Health is shaking his head. Here are some specifics that his government promised when they got into power in 2021. Here's what he took to the voters in 2021. 10% of NHS budget will be allocated to mental health. Is that happening, Cabinet Secretary? Because nobody else seems to believe that it is. And I'd be happy to give way if you can enlighten us on that.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm happy to confirm that our commitment remains to bring forward the 10% and 1% in the lifetime of this Parliament, as we committed to in our manifesto.
Jamie Green.
The answer speaks for itself. You're committed to it. We're 9-10 months out from an election. That commitment was made nearly 5 years ago, and that's why there are tens of thousands of people sitting on a waiting list, because it hasn't happened, Cabinet Secretary. You can wish it to happen. Making it happen is another thing. The other commitment made was 1% of the CAMS budget, NHS budget to CAMS. That clearly has not happened. We could do this pop up and down. Please confirm if it's happening or not all day. The reality is that none of these commitments are being met. None of them. Here's another one. The promise to develop a national neurodevelopmental pathway. 4 years ago was the feasibility study for that pathway. 4 years ago. That still has not happened. What about the shared care arrangements that we've heard so much about today? Where has that left families? We've left with a system that you can only access if you have the ability to pay for it. We have a two-tier diagnosis system for neurodivergence in this country, just as probably we do for dental care, audiology or many other frontline NHS services. Is that where we're at? Is that what the SNP went to Scotland with in 2021? I think not. The problem is they're not just broken promises, political ones or otherwise. They are actually impacting people's lives. Paul Sweeney talked about GIRFEC. If you want to get it right for every child, then you have to bring down those waiting times. We are actually getting it very wrong for very many children. That's where GIRFEC is at the moment. It's not just the health emergency. Willie Rennie eloquently pointed out the economic emergency that we face too, the inactivity in our working age population. And now, if 1 in 10 Scots are deemed to be neurodivergent, then why on earth would we not want to get so many of these people back into the workplace? What do we need to be doing to support employers and businesses who want to help those people into the workplace? Here's some startling statistics, my final moments. 29% of autistic people are in employment in Scotland, just 29%. For those with learning disabilities, that drops to 4% of that cohort. That compares to 82% of employment in the non-disabled workforce. Let me say clearly, neurodivergence in the workplace is an asset, actually. They can be more diverse, they can be more productive, and it's about time that the government and business saw that. What needs to change, Presiding Officer? Well, we need to reinstate those shared care protocols. We need to look at some of those stepped care pathways or the 4-tier pathways others have suggested. We need an employment strategy that includes neurodiverse people, and we need to close that mental health funding gap. Why? Because neurodivergent people in Scotland are not asking for special treatment. They're asking for fairness, they're asking for timely diagnosis, they're asking for care, and they're asking for a chance to thrive. We cannot afford to leave neurodivergent people behind in our economy, physically or mentally. Let today, I hope, be that debate which is a turning point for ministers, where neurodevelopmental services are no longer optional extras. They are essential. They are essential to a healthier, more inclusive and more ambitious Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on addressing the inadequate provision for neurodevelopmental conditions. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 17701 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 17701 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 17702 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on extension of a bill at stage 2. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 17702 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 17703, 17704 and 17705 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time. There are 9 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 17669.3 in the name of Jenny Gilruth, which seeks to amend motion 17669 in the name of Willie Rennie on a new plan for Scotland's teaching workforce, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.